Julie, it's a surprise. We're heading out with Mom, my spouse declared with assurance as he entered the room. I was astonished as I stared at him and his contented mother. I was shocked to learn that his mother was expecting because this was meant to be our honeymoon. I was at a loss for words, but before I could get my mouth working, my husband inquired, "What's wrong?" "Are you not content?" Naturally, I wasn't. He ought to have known that I had frequently voiced my displeasure to him over the strained bond between his mother and me. She thought I had stolen her darling son away, which is why she couldn't tolerate me. She would always be snarky when we met, but when my husband was present, she would behave like the ideal mother, so he would never believe me when I claimed she was tough. However, he continued to believe that taking her on our honeymoon was a wise decision. How could he have known? I asked him whether he had made reservations for her accommodation in flight. Looking perplexed, he remarked, "I thought I'd do it later." Raising my anger, I informed him that, given how far in advance we had booked ours, it was not feasible to secure a last-minute reservation during peak season. With a sneer, he added, "Then give us your ticket." I questioned him again since I didn't understand at first. "Give her your ticket if my mom is unable to attend," he continued, looking irritated. "I have the authority to choose because I paid for the vacation." I was hearing things that I couldn't believe. To my utter shock, his mother was standing there looking smug. How was he able to believe that this was okay? This was our honeymoon, so it wasn't just an ordinary vacation. It never occurred to me that he would invite his mother on a particular day. My mother-in-law is someone I wouldn't even want to travel with on a typical vacation. She had a smug expression on her face, obviously pleased that her son was prioritizing her, while I stood there shocked. "Go ahead, move quickly. Since I paid for it, there shouldn't be any issues," my spouse remarked. Is he genuinely under the impression that he may do anything he wants because he paid for the trip? The cost of the trip crossed my thoughts as I considered this. Julie, by the way, is my name. At 31, I work for a firm that my father owns. People first assumed that my family was the sole reason I received the position, but as I worked hard, they eventually started to appreciate me. Because of my family's company, some people still spread rumors about me, which may be hurtful at times. My spouse Scott has always been my rock in times like this. Prior to dating, we were close coworkers and share the same age. Scott does a terrific job in his career, and my father has seen his efforts and hard work. My dad was overjoyed to learn that we were getting married. "Scott, I've heard good things about you," he remarked. "Observe my daughter." In response, my spouse said, "I'll definitely make her happy." Observing the instance filled me with pride. At the time, there were rumors that Scott might become the company's next president, and my dad was considering transferring the firm to the next generation. We had discussed company management over dinner a lot, even though my dad hadn't said anything explicitly, so we had a sense that it may happen eventually. Scott's mother resides alone in their family home, as his father died away many years ago. He is devoted to his mother, and during our courtship, he would drop everything to assist her in need. I smiled and always encouraged his devotion to her, because she was his only parent. I was impressed by his admiration for his mother and his sense of pride in being in his company. But since we've been living together and getting married, I've begun to have my concerns. He usually starts with, "I'm going to see Mom for a bit," and he sees her once a week. Is his mother sick? I worriedly questioned my hubby. "Is your mom okay?" "No, Julie, don't worry," he answered. "It's simply crucial to sometimes spend some alone time with her." He wasn't as kind about saying this as he used to be, but at first he was. He was humming a tune cheerfully one Monday morning when I inquired, Are you going to your mom's house today? His attitude abruptly altered. Why do you say it like that? Was the question he posed after stopping what he was doing and inhaling deeply. I was astonished at how annoyed he appeared. I shrugged, wondering maybe I unintentionally came across as a little accusatory. Mom is lonely by herself, he replied, glaring at me. It's already been said. You can't seem to get along with her, so I go. Recognize, I was offended by what he said. Although I do have problems with my mother-in-law, that wasn't always the case. I wanted to show my appreciation for the woman who brought my beloved up. I really did try to be nice to her, but she didn't feel the same way. She spotted me right away as the one who had taken her kid away. She seemed aloof when I initially met her. She looked me up and down, scrutinizing me, and her once friendly countenance went serious the instant my husband left the room. So you're the daughter of the president? You seem like not much, she remarked. She looked so different without Scott that I was taken aback. She continued with more harsh words. You dared to show up here after stealing Scott from me. Don't think for a second I accept you. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Then she made a rude slurping sound with her tea, not offering me any. When I nervously addressed her as mother-in-law, she snapped, "Don't call me that. It's unpleasant." I couldn't understand why she was being so hostile, especially since we had just met. When I tried to speak up, she immediately shut me down. I felt helpless. Soon I heard Scott's footsteps returning, and suddenly her attitude changed again. She smiled sweetly, offered tea, and acted like nothing had happened. "Sorry, I forgot to offer you tea," she said, laughing lightly as Scott entered the room. "Mother, you didn't serve the tea yet," Scott asked. "Your fiancé is so charming," she said with a smile, then turned to me and added, "Julie, feel free to call me mother-in-law anytime." A chill ran down my spine. Since then, my mother-in-law has continued to say hurtful things to me, but only when Scott isn't around. It's like she has two sides to her. My husband doesn't seem to see her true nature no matter what. When I talk to him about it, he just brushes it off, saying, "My mother would never do that." He adds, "If you're that uncomfortable, you don't have to meet her." He doesn't believe me at all. At first, I tried hard to explain, but eventually I got tired of him always defending his mom. Now I only visit her when absolutely necessary. My husband probably thinks I hate her. "Make sure to lock the door when you leave," he said, and just like always, he left without looking back. I tried to call out, "Wait," but he was already gone. His figure blurred as tears filled my eyes. After our argument about his mother, he hasn't been coming home much. Sometimes it feels like his mother is more important to him than I am. Aside from the issues with his mom, Scott is a great husband. He helps me when I'm stressed about work and even does his share of the house chores, even though he's busy with his own job. At least he agrees we don't need to visit her more than necessary. Thinking about all of this, I flip through travel brochures. I try to shake off the negative thoughts and focus on our upcoming honeymoon. I'm excited about this trip. It'll be a chance to forget about his mom for a while and enjoy some time together. No unexpected calls from her. I start thinking about possible destinations, keeping in mind that Scott just became the team leader for a new project. I'd love to treat ourselves to something a little luxurious on this trip. But then I remember what Scott said. "I left all the planning to you, but I want the payment to come from my account." I had wanted us to split the cost of the honeymoon, but he just laughed it off and didn't want to listen. It didn't feel right for him to pay for everything, so I decided to cover part of it myself. Being the president's daughter, I knew my mother-in-law's sarcastic comments about spending too much would only get worse. That thought made me smile. Riley, just as I had resolved to stay positive, my mother-in-law popped back into my mind. Enough of this, I told myself to change my mood. I put the brochure aside and started preparing dinner for my husband, who would be home soon. Then the morning of our honeymoon arrived. As I was busy getting things ready, the doorbell suddenly rang. "Yes, come in," I said, opening the door. I was shocked by what I saw. There she stood, my mother-in-law, dressed in flashy clothes with a large suitcase in hand. Before I could even process it, my husband peeked out and said, "Mom, you're early." He smiled at her while she didn't even look at me. I stood there, unable to hide my confusion. I asked, "Early? What do you mean?" Just as we were about to leave for our honeymoon, I saw her large suitcase. What could it mean? Was she planning to stay at our house during our honeymoon? Troubled by this thought, my husband happily announced, "It's a surprise. Mom is coming with us." I couldn't hide my shock, and a strange sound escaped me. "What are you thinking?" I asked. "Wait, what does this mean?" I was still in disbelief when my husband, full of excitement, repeated, "It's a surprise. Mom is coming along." As I stood there completely confused, he proudly put his arm around his mother's shoulder and said, "It'll be more fun with Mom." My mother-in-law smiled at me, and I asked, "Wait a minute. Isn't a honeymoon supposed to be just for the couple? Shouldn't we have at least discussed this beforehand?" I tried to stay calm, even though I knew I wasn't wrong. My husband, however, didn't seem to understand why I was upset. Why couldn't we see eye to eye? To make things worse, my mother-in-law seemed to be enjoying my discomfort, humming to herself. I couldn't believe this was happening on the day we were supposed to leave for our honeymoon. "Why would you do something like this as a surprise?" I asked angrily. My husband responded, "It's fine because I paid for everything, right?" He frowned, noticing my shock. "No, it's not fine," I said, realizing that his offer to pay for the trip wasn't to make me feel better, but to avoid any complaints about bringing his mom along. "That's not going to work," I objected, which made both my husband and his mother look unhappy. "Why won't it work?" he asked, while my mother-in-law taunted, "Julie doesn't want to travel with me, does she?" I felt a headache coming on. "That's not the point, Scott. What about your mom's plane ticket? Is the hotel booked?" My husband looked confused and said, "I thought we could book it later." "That's impossible." I raised my voice. "When do you think we booked our tickets and hotel? There's no way you can book flights and hotels now, especially during a busy holiday season." The hotel we chose wasn't too fancy, but it was decent, and it's fully booked. As I continued explaining, my husband said, "Then can you give us all your tickets?" For a moment, I didn't understand what he meant. "If there's no ticket for my mother, then give me yours." "I paid for the trip, so I have the right to do that," he repeated, clearly annoyed. I was stunned. My mother-in-law looked smug, and I was left in disbelief. What was I hearing? My husband continued, "My mom went through the trouble of getting ready, so I've decided it'll just be the two of us. We can go on another trip with you later." I couldn't believe how easily he chose his mother over me. What was he thinking? "It's okay if I'm not there." I said again, this is supposed to be our honeymoon. Just me and my husband. I couldn't accept handing over our plans to my mother-in-law, who appeared out of nowhere. My husband kept saying his mother had prepared for the trip, but that didn't matter. If he wanted to keep the peace, she should step back. Yet I was shocked as he continued to push me to give up. "Come on, hurry up. There shouldn't be a problem since I paid for it," he said. I felt a headache coming on and sighed deeply. "Actually, I was going to keep this a secret," I said. "But my father is the one paying for this trip, Not you, so it doesn't make sense for you to demand the tickets, does it? My husband looked confused, like he couldn't believe what I was saying. He thought he had paid for everything, which is why he felt so entitled. "Why would your father do that?" he asked, surprised. I stared at him coldly. My father paid for the honeymoon as a gift so we could save money for our future. He even told me to keep it a secret because of your pride. "Why did you keep this from me?" my husband shouted, his face turning red with anger. My mother-in-law was just as shocked to hear my father had covered the costs. As I listened to my husband's angry words, I felt my patience running out. I had put up with my mother-in-law's behavior, and my husband always siding with her for far too long. "If you two want to go on the trip, return the money to my father and make your own arrangements," I said coldly. "Cancel the reservations and pay for it yourselves." Without waiting for their response, I grabbed my bags and left the house. This was no joke. It wasn't right for them to use my father's money, since I had handled all the bookings. Everything was in my name. I quickly canceled the flights and hotel and got into a taxi. Instead of heading to the airport, I told the driver to take me to my parents' house. When I arrived at home, dragging my suitcase behind me, my father was shocked to see me. After I explained everything, his face turned red with anger. "What kind of story is this? Is this some sort of joke?" he fumed. The constant calls from my husband only made my father angrier. I was furious too. This whole situation made me realize what I needed to do. "Dad, I'm thinking about getting a divorce," I said, my voice steady but filled with emotion. My father calmed down, and instead of saying anything, he gently comforted me, stroking my back. "I'm sorry, Dad," I whispered through my tears. He held my hand firmly. The next day, my husband showed up at my parents' house with a box of sweets as an apology. I was about to turn my husband away at the gate when my father stepped in. "If you're thinking about divorce, we need to talk properly." "Let's hear what he has to say," my father suggested. Even though I had planned to consult a lawyer, I followed his advice and let my husband in. As soon as my husband saw my father, he started apologizing right away. I felt annoyed seeing him act innocent in front of my dad. As he kept saying sorry, I sighed, and my father asked me to take him to the sitting room. "My apologies for causing trouble, President," my husband said, bowing his head even before we had finished greeting each other. He often called my father President, even in private, claiming it had become a habit. But when he did, he always seemed to slip into a businesslike attitude. His practiced way of apologizing felt fake. "What exactly are you apologizing for?" my father asked, sighing. He was as frustrated as I was. My husband just kept saying, "I'm sorry for the trouble," over and over. It wasn't an apology to me. It felt more like an insult. When he tried to explain himself, I cut him off and handed him the divorce papers. "Do you know how to fill these out?" "I've already completed my part. Please look it over." I spoke calmly but firmly. My husband turned pale as he stared at the papers. "Wait, Julie, divorce?" He looked at me seriously for the first time since he'd arrived. "I've always come second to you, Scott. That should be fine, right? You have your mother." I was ready to handle this like a business deal, refusing any attempts to patch things up. "What are you talking about? Why bring my mother into this?" He protested. She was excited about the trip too. "We can go on another one together, Julie." Shocked by how little he understood, I replied, "Another trip." What does that even mean? This was supposed to be our honeymoon. I was shaking, biting my lip in frustration. What kind of husband brings his mother on a honeymoon? Where does that even happen? But instead of realizing his mistake, Scott doubled down. "It was just a suggestion to bring her." At first, you said there were no flights or hotels available. He said, I couldn't believe it. How could you even think that was a reasonable idea at the last minute? I asked. He still didn't get it. Scott raised his voice, showing his anger. Are you saying we should send my mother back, even though she was looking forward to this trip? At that point, my father stepped in again, calming the situation. Let's stop this now, he said, his voice steady. After a long silence, he shook his head in disappointment. Scott, he said quietly, I'm really disappointed. Hearing this, Scott immediately straightened up and addressed him as president. My father looked at him with deep sadness and disappointment. After a heavy silence, my father asked, why did you choose your mother over Julie in a situation like this? The question hit Scott hard. He started stammering, struggling to find the right words. Well, he was clearly nervous, sweating as he tried to answer. While Scott could be assertive with me, he could never stand up to my father. My father continued, a honeymoon is meant for the couple. You could have taken your mother on a trip any time after that, right? Didn't you say you loved my daughter? Scott quickly shouted, I'm not lying. I just wanted to show my mother she's as important as Julie. At this sudden outburst, my father looked at him sternly for the first time. Even if it makes Julie sad, is that okay? My father pressed. Scott stammered again, trembling, before finally saying, I'm sorry. But the way he clenched his fist showed that his apology was more out of pride and humiliation than genuine regret. He was apologizing because my father was angry, not because he truly believed he had done something wrong. Scott, you are a capable person, my father said, and for a moment, Scott looked relieved. But then he realized he had misunderstood. My father's expression became cold and stern. But even if you're good at your job, a person who doesn't cherish their family can never be trusted. My father handed Scott a pen, a gesture that made Scott visibly shiver with fear. You should not be apologizing to me, my father said firmly, pushing the pen into Scott's hand. Shaken, Scott turned to me, pleading desperately. Julie, please don't go through with the divorce. I'll change, I promise. He fell to his knees, clinging to my legs, begging. I will prioritize Julie from now on, he vowed, but his words felt hollow, as if he were only saying what he thought I wanted to hear. Then out of nowhere, Scott blurted, please. If we divorce, I won't be able to pay off the debts. Debts? I asked, confused. What are you talking about? I repeated, stunned by this new information. Suddenly, Scott recoiled, covering his mouth, realizing he had said too much. He looked filled with regret. My father and I just stood there silently, staring at him in disbelief. Finally, after a long pause, Scott nervously began, well, it's about. He hesitated, clearly terrified to continue. But when he did, the truth shocked us both. Scott revealed that he and his mother had been confident that he would eventually take over as president of my father's company. Because of this, they had been spending recklessly, believing the company's wealth would soon be theirs. The reason he visited his mother's house, on the divorce decree. Talking no longer made sense, so my father and I made the silent decision to grab a cup of coffee without even trying to offer Scott some. Ultimately, there was no difficulty in finalizing the divorce. The procedure proceeded easily because my father had retained a first-rate attorney and I had kept a thorough journal. In addition, we asked for alimony to compensate for the lost honeymoon expenses. My father was so adamant that I had to giggle when he declined Scott's side's request for a decrease. At work, word of our divorce immediately got out, and Scott's environment totally transformed. He chose to step down since he was feeling so uneasy. He didn't get much severance compensation because he chose to leave. His meager resources had to be used to settle his obligations and pay the alimony. He is currently leading a pretty simple life. His mother, on the other hand, is bedridden after becoming unwell. There are rumors circulating that Scott is taking up part-time employment and requesting financial assistance from his old coworkers, but who can tell whether they are accurate? People now make jokes about these stories during get-togethers. In my case, my father has finally made the decision to retire, and it appears that I will succeed him as business president thanks to the enthusiastic support of the staff. I was originally hesitant to take on such a significant responsibility, but witnessing my father's uncommon display of vulnerability, wanting to entrust the firm to a trustworthy person, inspired me to take on the challenge. I feel like I have to live up to his standards now. Even though I wasn't sure I wanted to be a leader, it appears I had my father's managerial skill. The corporation is performing better and better under his chairmanship. I started drawing more attention at different CEO gatherings since I gained this newfound confidence. Though I haven't given it much consideration, perhaps it's time for me to start a new chapter in my life.
Welcome, my little slave. Despite knowing that I was here to formally introduce myself for marriage, this was the first thing she said. What? I thought I must have heard wrong and let out a confused voice. The mother-in-law giggled as she looked at me. Oh, weren't you a slave after all? With such a poor-looking face. And David, whom I thought was on my side, betrayed me terribly. Glancing at my face, David burst out laughing. It looks poor, right? I'd love to see what your parents look like. That's right. Well, coming to a wealthy family like ours, I wonder if your parents would faint. The mother-in-law and David continued to look down on me. I couldn't stand being looked down upon even by my parents. While they weren't looking, I secretly sent a message to my father. He replied immediately. I'm on my way there right now. I'm going to get some fresh air outside. I couldn't bear to hear any more insults from David and his family. Don't you run away now. David's vulgar laughter echoed. I left the seat too and waited for my father to arrive. 10 minutes later. I brought my father to meet David and the others. I am the father of the slave. My father spoke calmly, but his eyes were not smiling at all. What? The mother-in-law, who should know my father's face, stiffened her face greatly. I am Kelly Smith. I turned 30 this year. I work as an office worker at a small company called Foster Machinery, and I have lived as inconspicuously as possible. That's why I only wear foundation for my usual makeup. I prefer to wear navy or black clothing. I don't wear contacts, and my glasses are thick and have a high prescription. The reason I go to such lengths is that my father has a high-profile job, and I have been influenced by it since I was young. My father is an actor. He used to be popular, and apparently, he was surrounded by women when he walked down the street. He often appears on TV in supporting roles and is moderately well known. I had a tough time because of my father until middle school. Classmates would ask for my father's autograph, and their parents would say, "Let us meet him." I refused all those requests, and as a result, I was often criticized by others. I was probably thought to be unfairly privileged. I was also harassed by envious classmates. I didn't want to cause any trouble for my beloved father. I hated the thought of being seen as arrogant. After much thought, I made a thorough effort to dress plainly and went to a high school where I knew no one. Fortunately, Smith is a common surname, so I was able to live normally from high school. And perhaps because I look plain, men don't approach me. That allowed me to have a comfortable student life. I loved talking about manga with my female friends, and those were probably the happiest times. I met my fiancé David after becoming a working adult. David works for the leasing company that provides copiers to the company I work for. David and I had little direct interaction. David would come regularly to check on the copier, and we would exchange a few words then. Our relationship changed dramatically when the copier broke down one day. That day, I was busy preparing materials for a meeting to be held the next morning. However, the copier stopped working in the middle of this. I was greatly troubled. If this continued, I wouldn't be able to prepare the materials for tomorrow's meeting. So I hurriedly called David. David came quickly and checked the copier. "Can you fix it?" When I asked David anxiously, he responded with a smile. "No worries. I'll take care of it." I fell in love with David's smile in an instant. The rest is history. In the end, the copier wasn't fixed, but David arranged for a replacement. The materials were prepared in time for the meeting. I, who had fallen in love with David, made every effort to appeal to him. I asked for his contact information and called him frequently. Then I confessed to David, and we started dating. David was always very kind even after we started dating. He was always considerate, and I had never seen him angry. I thought that even if he knew my father's real identity, he would still treat me kindly. With that in mind, after dating for 3 months, I bravely proposed to David. He accepted joyfully. I remember being very happy. However, there was one thing that concerned me. It was about my appearance. I had always worn thick glasses. I always dressed plainly, even on dates. It was a long-standing habit. Actually, I looked just like my father. I have distinct facial features. Because of my appearance, I was envied by girls in middle school. Boys also judged me by my looks, and I had some tough times. But with David, I was sure it would be okay. From now on, I thought, I would gradually change my appearance for David's sake. That's what I thought. However, after getting engaged to David, I started to feel some discomfort. Before getting engaged, David seemed like a kind person, but recently he has started making remarks that look down on me. The other day, we went to a bridal fair to decide on a wedding venue because David had suggested it. The place David took me to was a dazzling world. It was a luxurious guest house, perfect for a large-scale wedding with over 100 guests. Seeing that scene, I was perplexed. I don't have many friends from my school days. Plus, I didn't want to stand out, so I had hoped for a small venue with only a ceremony. I really wanted to go home right away. However, David was having fun and I couldn't bring it up. So, I endured and passed the time. After it was over, we stopped at a cafe. David was in a very good mood. That wedding venue we just saw was nice, wasn't it? I would prefer an even flashier ceremony though. While drinking coffee, David spoke. If things continued this way, we would end up choosing that wedding venue. In a panic, I decided to discuss my preference with David. I think a wedding with just the two of us might be nice. I don't like standing out too much. I had thought the kind David would surely compromise. However, the reality was completely different. David looked at me and snickered. Indeed, a plain Jane like Kelly wouldn't suit a wedding like the one we just saw. Is there even a dress that would suit those thick glasses of yours? What? I was bewildered by David's comment. But a wedding is a matter between families, right? My family is wealthy. We need to have a decent wedding to maintain our dignity. I was speechless. The previously kind David had started looking down on me as if he had changed. I was terribly shocked by David's attitude. And to my bewildered self, David made an even worse comment. Kelly should just stay quiet and do as I say. You should be grateful to even get married, being such a plain Jane. Suddenly, David's face turned serious, and he made that comment. I was bewildered by his words. I even felt scared by David's serious expression. Then, the next moment, David smiled and said, I'll decide everything for you. Kelly, you just need to say yes and do as I tell you. Yes. I didn't know how to respond and laughed awkwardly. Maybe getting engaged to David was a mistake. But it's too late to pretend it never happened. I have already reported our engagement to the company and our parents. Moreover, I still liked David even after all that had been done to me. He might return to the kind David I knew before the engagement. That's why, despite being puzzled by David's change, I had no choice but to continue with the engagement. David kept making remarks that troubled me. Each time, my heart was hurt. But I couldn't come to dislike David. Even though I thought about breaking up with him, the kind David I knew kept flashing in my mind. I still loved David. I continued the engagement relationship while being puzzled by David's change. Then one day, something happened that made me even more bewildered. It was the day David and I went to the wedding venue to handle the paperwork. After visiting several wedding venues, David decided on the first luxurious guest house we saw. Eagerly, David said, "After all, a grand ceremony suits me. Of course, it's mismatched for Kelly." David laughed heartily, hurting me. And so, for the paperwork, David and I went to that guest house. On the way there, I encountered a person. "Isn't that David?" "Mom? What are you doing here?" David was surprised and looked at the woman. Then, David introduced her to me. "Kelly, this is my mom. Mom, this is Kelly Smith, my fiancé. Remember I told you I was getting married?" The mother-in-law smiled and greeted me. "I'm David's mother. You seem like a serious young lady. Where do you work? Surely it must be at a major company?" It was my first meeting with David's mother. I answered nervously. "I work in administration at Foster Machinery." Then, the mother-in-law looked puzzled. "Foster Machinery? I haven't heard of it." Then, David joined in our conversation. Foster Machinery is one of my sales destinations. It's a small company with about 30 employees, so it's natural you don't know it, Mom. Upon hearing David's explanation, the mother-in-law frowned. "I thought since you were David's fiancé, you'd work at a more reputable company. Isn't the salary there rather low? Are you planning to make David suffer?" "I'm sorry. Indeed, the salary at my current company isn't very high." So all I could do was apologize to the mother-in-law. Then, the mother-in-law sighed heavily and said, "Anyway, can you stop relying on David like a child? We come from a distinguished lineage. We don't need a woman from an unknown background." "Ah." I responded to the mother-in-law's comment with a bewildered reply, but the mother-in-law continued to heat up. "First of all, what about your parents? They work at a decent company, right?" The mother-in-law glared at me and interrogated me. "Well, my father is." As I tried to answer the mother-in-law's question with confusion, my eyes were drawn to her bag because there was something familiar in it. Seeing me silent, David spoke up. "Mom, calm down a bit. We'll go and formally introduce Kelly for marriage soon." "I see. I won't be very welcoming though." The mother-in-law looked at me with a displeased face, and it seemed my first impression was the worst for her. The path to marriage seemed too difficult, and I secretly sighed. Then came the day of the formal marriage introduction. Wow! In front of David's family home, I muttered in surprise. The scene before me far exceeded my expectations. Since the mother-in-law had mentioned they were from a distinguished family lineage, I had expected David's home to be wealthy. However, the scene before me was more amazing than I expected. The gate was automatic, and there was an elevator inside. Additionally, there were 10 luxury cars outside. They were all foreign cars, probably a hobby of the father-in-law. David started talking to me. "My dad isn't here today because of work. It's just Mom, so just relax as usual." David said this with a smile, but my face tightened even more. The mother-in-law had been harsh to me before. Surely she would make some snide remark today too. Then, David and I entered the living room where the mother-in-law was waiting. "Hello. About the other day." I said that to the mother-in-law. Then, the next moment, she said something outrageous. "Welcome, my little slave." Even though she should have known I was here for a marriage introduction, this was the first thing she said. "What?" I thought I must have misheard and let out a confused voice. The mother-in-law chuckled as she looked at me. "Oh. Weren't you a slave? You have such a poor-looking face. I just wanted someone I could use for free. A slave. How could she say such a terrible thing? Then the mother-in-law laughed as if she was having fun. David told me. He said it's okay to treat you like a slave. It seems like David just wanted to marry someone who would obey him completely. Sorry for you. David, what do you mean? I asked David, turning pale. It must be a poor joke. I wanted to believe that. And David, whom I thought was on my side, betrayed me terribly. Glancing at my face, David burst out laughing. Poor face, right? I'd love to see what your parents look like. They probably have plain faces too. Maybe we could use them as well, right? David said this and laughed loudly. Indeed, having someone obedient for free is appealing. But coming to a wealthy family like ours, I wonder if your parents would faint. The mother-in-law and David continued to look down on me. Then, the mother-in-law asked with a smirk. By the way, what does your father do? He's not homeless, is he? Such a thing. Then David burst out laughing and replied to the mother-in-law. Mom, that's not a job. It's obvious from Kelly that he doesn't have a stable job. Ah, I'm laughing so much it hurts. David and the mother-in-law continued to look down on my parents. They assumed they had low education and plain looks. Frustrated, I clenched my teeth and listened to their remarks. The mother-in-law and David were too disrespectful. I couldn't stand being looked down upon even by my parents. While they weren't looking, I quietly sent a message to my father. I need you here right now. I sent this message along with a map of David's family home that David had sent me for today's marriage introduction. I knew my father had the day off from work today. He was probably relaxing at home by now. Fortunately, my father replied within a minute. I'm on my way. Relieved by my father's response, I spoke to David and the mother-in-law. I'm feeling unwell, so I'm going to get some fresh air outside. I couldn't bear to hear any more insults from David and his family. I thought I would wait quietly outside until my father arrived. Oh really? Then David, let's relax and continue our coffee. The mother-in-law was pleased to be alone with David. Kelly, don't you dare run away. David's vulgar laughter echoed. I left the room and waited outside for my father's arrival. 10 minutes later. My father, wearing dark sunglasses, appeared. Kelly, what's going on? You were supposed to be introducing your fiancé's family today, right? I was surprised when you suddenly called. My father asked me with a puzzled face. Dad. I'm just so frustrated. Seeing my father's face, I felt relieved and started to cry. I tried to hold back, but the tears kept coming. What's wrong, Kelly? Seeing me cry, my father began to panic. I explained everything that had happened to my father. Since getting engaged, David's attitude had changed. I also told him about how the mother-in-law had joined David in looking down on me. I can't forgive them for looking down on you without knowing anything. Even as I explained, my tears didn't stop. My father listened to me in silence. However, it seemed like he was quietly angry. Then I told my father something about the mother-in-law. At that moment, my father smirked. He took off his sunglasses and handed them to me. We're going inside now. I'll make sure they regret hurting Kelly. I made a decision at my father's words. My love for David had cooled. All that was left was a desire for revenge. I've made up my mind too. We'll make David and the others regret this. After doing something, I put on my father's sunglasses. Then, together with my father, I entered David's family home. I stood before David and the others, leading my father. Sorry to keep you waiting. Standing resolute with my father, I, wearing sunglasses, left David speechless. Why are you suddenly wearing sunglasses? He muttered while looking at me. The mother-in-law initially smirked at me, but upon seeing my father next to me, she was stunned. I realized how people can freeze in shock. The mother-in-law must have been planning to say something awful again when I returned. But too bad. I won't let things go her way. Instead, I plan to push her into the abyss. She must already know who my father is. Then my father spoke to the mother-in-law. I am the father of the slave. His voice was calm, but his eyes were not smiling. His handsome face only added to his sternness. What? The mother-in-law, who likely knew my father's face, dramatically stiffened her expression. Why? Why is Mr. John Smith here? No, could this be some kind of prank? While shaking, the mother-in-law spoke. Her cheeks were a bit red. There seemed to be an excited atmosphere around her. And her eyes sparkled like those of a young girl. David, not understanding well, remained dumbfounded. My father did not answer her questions and just stared sternly at David and the mother-in-law. The mother-in-law, making eye contact with my father, blushed. It was unbecoming of a woman her age. I watched the mother-in-law with cold eyes. Then, a bewildered David finally asked. Mr. John Smith? Do you know him, Mom? This person. David probably doesn't know about my father. I think he's quite well known among the mother's generation. But younger people might not know unless they watch dramas. Then the mother-in-law glared sharply at David. David. What an impolite thing to say. This gentleman is Mr. John Smith. A great actor and my first love. What? David seemed incredulous. Then the mother-in-law turned towards my father with a smile and spoke. I'm a huge fan of you. Look, this too. She hurriedly grabbed her bag and showed it to my father. It's a keychain available only to fan club members. I've been a fan of you for 20 years. The mother-in-law began to assert her status as a huge fan of my father. Mom. David was somewhat disgusted by the mother-in-law's sudden change. The mother-in-law continued to talk to my father. She must have been very excited to have her favorite actor in front of her. However, my father's gaze on the mother-in-law was very stern. And after being silent until then, my father finally spoke. I understand that you're a fan of mine. However, you tried to treat my beloved daughter Kelly like a slave, didn't you? What? The mother-in-law's high spirits suddenly turned to dismay. She froze, visibly trembling. Ignoring the mother-in-law, my father continued. And you dared to treat me as a homeless person without even meeting me? That's quite disrespectful. Saying that, my father glared at the mother-in-law. Then she began to panic. No. I didn't know that Miss Kelly's father was Mr. John Smith. I'd be thrilled to have you as a family. Right, David? Yeah. David seemed to be pushed by the mother-in-law. And the mother-in-law tried to justify herself to my father. I was disgusted listening to her. Until my father arrived, the mother-in-law had been looking down on both me and my father. Seeing my father, she changed so quickly. I only felt distrust. If I look closely, Kelly does resemble you, such a wonderful lady. The earlier comments were just because I was jealous of losing my son. If I had known about you, I would have treated you more respectfully. The mother-in-law continued to desperately pretend. My father looked at her with annoyance. Watching their exchange, I thought to myself, I can't keep troubling my father like this. Besides, this is my issue. I should clearly express this to the mother-in-law myself. So I told her. I am breaking off my engagement with David. There will never be any family ties between my father and your family. No. Kelly, it was my fault. You're missing the chance to become family with Mr. John Smith. Please reconsider. The mother-in-law, with a tearful face, tried to persuade me. She had been terrible to me up until now. Even her tearful face couldn't be trusted. I looked at her with cold eyes. However, seeing me silent, the mother-in-law thought she could persuade me. She smiled sweetly at me. You want to marry David, don't you? I won't oppose it anymore, it's okay. I will do anything you say for your sake. The mother-in-law, desperate to become family with my father, clung to me. Her readiness to do anything was the complete opposite of her initial stance. I even despised how quickly the mother-in-law changed her opinions. I muttered softly. "No, I don't want to." "Excuse me? What did you say?" Not sure if she had heard me, the mother-in-law tilted her head. So I shouted louder this time. "I absolutely do not want to become family with you." "What?" The mother-in-law was baffled by my shout. I poured out my feelings to her. "As soon as you heard where I work, you made derogatory comments, right? And you spoke terribly about my father. I will never forgive that," I firmly told the mother-in-law. "What?" Thinking it futile to persuade me further, the mother-in-law looked at my father. Then, smiling, she spoke to him. "Kelly says this, but you want your daughter to be happy, right? Our family has a lot of money, and surely she will be happy with us. Certainly, some people might think money equals happiness. However, I am different." Perhaps understanding my feelings, my father countered her words. "Kelly values love more than money. Besides, we have money. I make a decent amount from acting." The mother-in-law was at a loss for words. It's understandable. After all, my father is a well-known actor who appears frequently on dramas. He earns a lot and isn't short on money. Coming from a wealthy home, there are no benefits for me to marry just for money. The mother-in-law realized this and fell silent. She probably couldn't think of a good way out. Watching the silent mother-in-law, my father continued. "You say you are a fan of mine, but I detest people who disparage my dear daughter. Could you please stop calling yourself a fan?" With that, my father glared at the mother-in-law. Then, tears started to roll down the mother-in-law's cheeks. "If you hate me, I can't go on living." The mother-in-law said this, breaking down in tears. David, who had been silent until now, started to speak. "If you stay quiet, you can say whatever you want, huh? Kelly, you'll regret breaking off our engagement. No one else will bother with a plain Jane like you." David smirked as he spoke. "David, stop it." In front of my father, the mother-in-law tried to stop David. But David didn't hold back. "I chose a plain Jane like you because I thought you'd obey me. I was planning to cheat with cute girls once we were married. This really pisses me off." David rambled on about things I didn't even ask to hear. Listening to David's words, I thought calmly. There was never any love from David. He just wanted a marriage with a woman who would obey him. My affection for David had long since cooled. As I was thinking about this, David continued his selfish remarks. "You." My father gritted his teeth, looking like he was about to grab David. It seemed like a good time for me to fight back. "Dad, wait." So I stopped my father. I remained wearing my sunglasses, and I let out a slight smile. "What now?" David seemed taken aback by my confident smile. "Do I still look plain?" I swiftly took off the sunglasses I had been wearing. "What?" David stared at my face, frozen in place. It made sense. With the sunglasses off, I was fully made up. Normally, I only wore foundation. But now, I had done my eyeshadow, mascara, and eyeliner. After meeting my father and crying, I had quickly done my makeup. Just eye makeup, but I think it really changed my appearance. "Is that really you, Kelly?" David's face turns a bit red. He must be mesmerized by how the makeup enhances my features. Yes, it's definitely me. Until now, I didn't want to stand out, so I intentionally made myself look plain. But I've decided to stop hiding myself. Until now, it was because of my father that I unintentionally stood out. That's why I wanted to remain inconspicuous. However, because of that, both David and the mother-in-law spoke ill of my father. If they're going to badmouth my father, I might as well stand out a bit and be myself. That's what I thought. David, with a flushed face, says, "If you had been like this from the start, I would have been nicer to you." I would reconsider everything with you if you looked like this with makeup. Let's cancel the engagement breakup right now. And while you're at it, introduce me to some beautiful actresses through your father. Who would cancel the engagement now? And asking for actresses is too presumptuous. I firmly told David. The engagement is off for good. I don't need you, David. I'll also cancel the wedding venue. What? David is stunned. However, I'm not going to let him off that easily. I press him further. Of course, you'll be responsible for the cancellation fee for the wedding venue. That's only fair, right? The mother-in-law cries out in confusion. Wait a minute. It's too much to ask him to pay the whole amount. David also looks bewildered and is unable to argue. Then, my father chimes in. Why not have David's father pay for it? With all those luxury cars he owns, it should be easy for him. My father says this with a pleasant smile. Here, I play my strongest card. If you're not satisfied, we can take this to court? But remember, my father is a famous actor. If the news gets out about this, he might be attacked by his extreme fans. My father has many fervent fans. A critic who once called my father a poor actor faced terrible consequences. Harassing phone calls and letters with knives in them, the extent of the harassment was unimaginable. It was even in the news for a while. Remembering that incident, the mother-in-law's face turns pale. She frantically tries to persuade David. David, you should bear the entire cancellation fee. You don't know what might happen. From the look on the mother-in-law's face, it seems David understands the gravity of the situation. Huh? No way. David's face turns desperate, and he collapses to his knees. I don't need David in my life. Dad, let's go home. I ignore David and the mother-in-law, who are slumped down, and leave with my father. My engagement with David is conclusively broken off. And David ends up being responsible for the full amount of the cancellation fee for the wedding venue. In fact, David's father is the CEO of a major corporation, and my father once appeared in commercials for his company. Because of that connection, my father informed David's father about David and the mother-in-law's behavior. Naturally, David's father was furious. He severely reprimanded David and the mother-in-law. Then, he pressured David to take on the full amount of the cancellation fee. As a result, David had to shoulder millions. The fallout affected the mother-in-law as well. This time, she was faced with divorce from David's father. It wasn't just because of how they treated us. Apparently, the mother-in-law was notorious for her lavish spending. She had spent a significant amount following my father, a famous actor. That funding came from David's father's money. David's father had apparently run out of patience with her. Additionally, my father revealed that the mother-in-law had sent him quite risky love letters. I want to divorce and be with Mr. John Smith. My current partner is just a source of money. She had written such content in love letters to my father. David's father was furious about this. Despite the mother-in-law's resistance, they proceeded to divorce through lawyers. The mother-in-law lamented. This isn't how it was supposed to be. And lived in tears, I heard through the grapevine. She was also forced to leave my father's fan club. Her troublesome stalking behavior was too much to handle. It's hard to imagine happiness visiting the mother-in-law now. She brought it upon herself. Half a year has passed. And then, David was arrested. The reason was his stalking behavior towards me. He couldn't forget me after I took off my sunglasses that day. David started appearing frequently in front of me. Even after I quit my job, he would wait outside my house. He also called often. Please, agree to get engaged again. I can't manage without you. David pleaded over the phone, crying, but in the end, he was only looking at my face. It was very different before and after I showed my makeup. I don't need a man who judges only by looks. I politely refused and blocked his calls. However, David's behavior only escalated. I consulted the police several times. At times, I felt threatened by him. After much deliberation, I filed a complaint with the police. My father supported this decision. Eventually, David was arrested for forcibly entering my house. And with his arrest, he was apparently fired from his job. Now, all that's left for David is several tens of thousands in debt. It's unlikely that David will be able to lead a decent life from now on. That's the punishment for looking down on people. What goes around, comes around. Since then, I've been working as my father's manager. This job is different from my previous office work, it's more challenging. I manage my father's schedule and accompany him to venues to make greetings. I even handle salary negotiations. Previously, as an office worker, I mostly commuted between home and the office. I rarely spoke to people at work and spent most of my time facing a computer. Now, meeting and talking to people has become a main part of my job, a big change from before. Yet, I find this new role incredibly enjoyable. Being a manager is a glamorous job, but it's more than that. It's a behind-the-scenes job that allows my father to focus on acting. The hours are irregular, and it requires adaptability. More than anything, it's a job that allows me to support my father up close. After causing so much worry in the past, I want to properly repay him. It's a job I've just started. Many challenges will likely arise. But I want to persevere and keep looking forward. I continue to work hard every day by my beloved father's side.
My husband Charles tells me he's going to marry the woman he's been seeing and asks for a divorce. Let's not waste time with property division, just leave quickly, Sharon taunts me, as if she's relishing in my misery. Donald, too, is infatuated with a woman he met at a bar. They don't want to live with me. I'll leave just as you wish, but before that, I'll give you a piece of my mind. My name is Joy Len, named with the hope of being blessed with much joy. Joy and Joy Len. I'm a 50-year-old woman whose life hasn't been as joyful as I'd hoped, but now my days are filled with happiness, so I can look back and laugh at the past. Let me take you back to when I was 35. I was about to celebrate my 10th wedding anniversary with Charles. We hadn't been blessed with children, and I found it somewhat painful to hear comments from those around us like, "Do you have any kids? And children are wonderful, you know." Conversations with Charles had dwindled, partly because he had been promoted a few years earlier, became busier with work, and traveled frequently. I was working too, so we hardly saw each other. No wonder we didn't have children. Well, this too is a form of marriage, and it's easier on our minds. Having children or not, it doesn't matter, that's what I thought. One day our family grew in a way we hadn't expected. It wasn't an angelic baby that arrived. Instead, it was parents-in-law that seemed like demons from hell. Apparently, right after we got married, the parents-in-law had been constantly telling Charles that they wanted to live with us. Charles weighed the hassle of living together against the hassle of continually refusing. As a result, he decided that living together would be less of a hassle. Surprisingly rational or not, hey, I didn't agree to live together. According to Charles, I'm hardly ever home, so it's fine. It might be fine for you, but still, as Charles said, it's fine. If the parents-in-law are good people, I had a hard time with these parents-in-law even before we started living together. They were the ones who persistently asked me, "When are you having kids?" Sharon would always say, "The more children you have, the better," every time we met. But you only gave birth to Charles, right? Living with such parents-in-law, it's a stomach-churning story. I wonder how living together will turn out. My expectations were quickly betrayed, not in a good way. It turned out even worse than I thought. Donald solemnly declared as we started living together, "We won't give you any pension or living expenses." Then Sharon continued with a smile, "Let's go with that arrangement." Wait, what kind of arrangement is that? Charles also said something like, "We both work, so we can manage without receiving living expenses." So Charles is one of them too. I had never been particularly dissatisfied with Charles until now. I didn't expect much from a husband. Even before we got married, I thought a husband who doesn't get angry easily and works hard was good enough. But now a wave of complaints that I never had before came rushing in. Moreover, as I lived with the parents-in-law for a while, I gradually understood the reason they wanted to live with us. Donald would often go out somewhere at night. I believed him when he said he was going out to drink with friends, but then I found a point card from what you'd call a nightclub at a business card with Nancy written on it in the laundry. There were various types of bars, but this was clearly a service industry that directly satisfies a man's desires. I see he likes Nancy. I can't believe he's still so energetic at his age, I thought. Of course. I meant it in a bad way. No wonder he can't give us living expenses. He's spending it on Nancy. It can't be helped. No way. On the other hand, Sharon gradually started to harass me. Moreover, she was cunning and intensified the harassment, so much so that even I didn't notice at first. At first, I thought she was being kind. I could have endured it if it had just been about the way I fold laundry or season my cooking. But there were times when Sharon called me by the name of Charles's ex-girlfriend. Every time Sharon would apologize, saying, "I remember her strongly because she was the first girlfriend Charles introduced me to. I didn't do it on purpose. I'm sorry." At first, I thought Sharon is old, so maybe such things happen. But as it continued, I realized something was off. Speaking of which, every time I took a shower, the bathroom was always dirty. I initially thought the mess in the bathroom was from Charles and the others who had gone in before. But no one complained about the bathroom being dirty, so without a doubt it must have been Sharon who was in before me. There were other instances, too, like when Sharon, mistakenly thinking everyone had already bathed on a snowy day, unplugged the bathtub, leaving me to shower in the freezing cold. She also once took my favorite necklace from the closet without asking, and then lost it. Each time Sharon would say, "I didn't do it on purpose. I just wasn't thinking, I'm sorry." While it's possible to accidentally shower or call someone by the wrong name, taking jewelry without permission is not something that can be brushed off as a mere oversight. I began to suspect that maybe this was all intentional harassment aimed at me. When I saw Sharon angrily sitting at the dining table saying, "My dinner is late because Joy Len came home late," I finally realized it was indeed harassment, albeit subtle. Come to think of it, Sharon hasn't done any housework since she came to her home. She throws her socks inside out into the laundry and tosses bottles into the trash without removing the labels, adding minor inconveniences every time. She complains if meals are late and if the sheets are messy, and sometimes she even throws things. I finally understood our home was indeed graced by the arrival of a baby. 2 of them, in fact, both big and delightfully stubborn. Exhausted from my job as a caregiver, all I wanted was to quickly escape this situation and go to bed. So I kept silently tolerating Sharon's behavior. I didn't have the energy to argue with anyone. When I returned home, I wanted to rest as quickly as possible, even if it was just for a moment. While I was exhausted and didn't notice at first, it seemed that Sharon knew about Donald's night outings. When an actress appeared on TV, Sharon persistently asked Donald, "Donald, don't you like girls like her?" "You do, don't you?" The actress's name was Nancy, the same as the girl from the bar. Donald looked pale after that incident. I asked Sharon once, "Are you okay with Donald going out like that?" Sharon replied, "If I get a divorce, I'll be someone who has a divorce history at this age, right? That's miserable and it looks bad to society. Of course, I don't like it, but he's just playing with professionals at the bar, right? If he's not serious, I can accept it." She wasn't holding back from divorce because of her concern for Donald, but rather she feared becoming someone with a history of divorce. I couldn't understand it. Turning a blind eye to infidelity must be causing her significant internal stress, and Sharon's outlet for that stress was harassing me. By harassing me, not only could she vent her stress, but she could also avoid doing housework. It was like killing two birds with one stone. I was certain I knew why Sharon had insisted on living with Charles. Since living with the in-laws, Charles increasingly made excuses not to come home, saying he had to work overtime. This house was rotten from the roots to the pillars. At this rate, even I might end up crushed under the rotten floorboards. It happened one day about 6 months after we started living together. Charles, who rarely had the same day off, said something unexpected. "Please, let's get a divorce." It was a bolt from the blue. It turns out Charles had been having an affair with a classmate for a long time. He even said he wanted to marry this person, and I had no clue. Apparently, they started dating just before he got promoted. I thought he was working hard for our sake, but could it have been for his classmate? Was it my fault for not paying attention to Charles's behavior, using my exhaustion as an excuse? I thought affairs only happened on TV and to people like Donald. No, maybe it's natural for Charles to cheat, given that Donald does it too. Once this house is ready, my girlfriend and I are moving in. You can take your things and leave, Charles declared. Sharon asked, "What's going to happen to us? Can you stay? My girlfriend doesn't mind sharing." Charles responded, "What a nice girl, Joy Lynn. Don't let her get away with it. If she asks for property division, we're going to use this house and everything in it." Donald chimed in, "Yeah, she's a really good girl, especially if she's cuter than Joy Lynn." Sharon shot Donald a look as if to say, "There you go again with women." But Charles and Donald just laughed. "These people are hopeless," I replied. "All right, I'm fine with the divorce. There's a memorial ceremony in Atlanta soon, right? Can you wait until then?" "Planning on enjoying the feast at the memorial ceremony, are you?" How pathetic. "There's no way I'm taking a woman who's divorcing me." Just leave already. Who's the pathetic one here? Who cares about the food? Despite everything, Sharon and I, the only women in the room, and both cheated on, can't seem to get along. No, I was planning to move out on that day. Going back home is a bit embarrassing since I was cheated on. Finding a place and handling the paperwork takes time. I thought it would work out around then. Charles, not Sharon, replied condescendingly, "If that's the case, fine. Cheating and then acting all high and mighty. Don't underestimate me. I'll destroy everything." A week passed, and the long-awaited day of revenge finally arrived. That day, my parents-in-law and Charles left the house early in the morning to attend a memorial ceremony in Atlanta. They planned to return by evening. All right then, let's give it a try. The garbage collection service. I had hired movers and they arrived. I had them load all the furniture in the house into the truck, the sofa, the microwave, Charles, and the parents-in-law's bed, and Sharon's clothes that had accumulated since moving in, Charles' favorite new vacuum cleaner, even the refrigerator and its contents, all of it gone. Minimalism is wonderful. With each item thrown away, it felt like my troubles were disappearing. Next, the movers came to transport my important belongings to my new place. By evening, the house was empty. The front door made a sound. It seemed Charles and the others had returned. I decided to greet them one last time as a good wife and stood at the entrance with a smile. "What? You're still here?" Charles frowned openly, so did my parents-in-law. "Oh, that's harsh. It's the last time, so it's fine to see each other's faces before leaving, right? I wanted to see your face." You still care about me." I blushed slightly. He chuckled. "What's the big deal? Fine, let's have a meal together one last time, shall we?" Charles, strangely in a good mood, heads towards the living room saying this, followed by Sharon, who looks exasperated, saying, "Charles is so sweet." Donald, on the other hand, turns to me with a proud look, saying, "That's my son." I'm baffled. Having a meal, would have been a nice way to part if there was anything left to eat. What? The meaning of my words. Charles, upon opening the living room door, lets out a silent exclamation. Sharon, annoyed, peeks into the living room after Charles and exclaims, "Just like him." Donald does the same. Wait, why? The fridge, no, even the furniture, appliances too. Why is there nothing anywhere? Of course, I threw them out. The house feels much bigger now, doesn't it? I thought it would be bad to leave old furniture for your new life with your girlfriend. Consider it my parting gift. Threw them out. Why? Why weren't you preparing to move? I've already moved. You throw away things you don't need when you move, right? Have you forgotten most of the things we bought when we got married were purchased with my money? Nothing bad will happen just because I, who didn't need them, threw them away. At my words, Charles points at me, his mouth moving but no words coming out. He seems too shocked to speak. With this, I'll forego any division of property. Well, there's hardly anything to divide anyway. Sharon, furious at my smile, says, "What have you done?" I'll return that phrase to your foolish son. There are limits to indecency, like cheating while having a wife and then saying to leave because you're remarrying. Wasn't your upbringing at fault? How could you speak to me like that? You were such a terrible daughter-in-law. Do you still consider yourself my mother-in-law? To me, you're just another old lady. I speak with a malicious smile, and Sharon mutters, "So ungracious." Shaking with anger, it's a secret that seeing Sharon angry is starting to be a bit fun. Don't you remember, if I ask for division of this house, you can't refuse, can you? Without the house, where would you two strangers live? You sold your family home, right? Yes, the parents-in-law had sold their house when they moved in with us. We won't need it anymore, they had said, so this house was absolutely necessary for them. They sided with their son's affair over his wife, probably thinking as long as there's a house with a housemaid, anything goes. Hearing my words, perhaps feeling rushed, Donald intervenes. Well, let's settle this amicably, pretending to be a good person. Yes, let's do that. Let's proceed calmly, just like the old man. Just like Donald suggests. Exactly. You know what I'm talking about, Joy. Of course. By the way, Donald, wasn't your cell phone broken today? Oh yeah, I realized it after leaving the house. It wouldn't turn on. If charging doesn't work, I guess I'll have to consult the store. There's no need for that. Your cell phone is right here. Saying that, I pulled Donald's cell phone from my pocket. Huh. 2 identical phones. What's going on? Donald is puzzled. I switched the phones just before you left today. The one I have is the real one, and the one you had is a used one I bought and removed the battery so it won't turn on. Since you aren't tech-savvy, I thought you'd just give up easily, thinking it's broken or out of battery. It seems like a huge success. Smiling, I get asked by Donald, "Why would you do that?" Why? Well, I have no clue. Speaking of which, you received an email today from your beloved Nancy, saying she had a good time the other day. You email each other daily, right? I'm so jealous of your close friendship. Donald gasps while Sharon glares at him. So, Donald, you were out with Nancy the other day. Woohoo, more loyalty than with Sharon. But you should put a lock on your phone. If you're cheating, you'll get caught easily. Stop it. Joy Lynn. Sharon protests. But I thought cheating is wrong. Charles cheated on me, and it hurt. I know exactly how Sharon feels, so I did something nice. At the end, I texted Nancy, "I'm bored. Let's break up." She was furious. I was dealing with this old man because he conveniently gives me money. Good thing you broke up safely. Oh, by the way, this is Nancy, Sharon, your enemy. Take a good look. Saying that, I showed everyone a photo of Nancy and Donald as I returned the phone. That's when it happened. Charles showed a stern expression no one had seen before. Why? My girlfriend is what? Everyone but Charles gasped. What's going on, Charles? What are you to Nancy? "No, that's my line, Dad. Why are you taking pictures with Nancy? Because I'm her boyfriend, obviously." "No, Nancy is my girlfriend. Isn't your girlfriend your classmate? We just met at a bar and started hanging out." Who would have thought that father and son were dating the same person? This development was also surprising for me. Ignoring Sharon and me, who were in shock, the men started a pointless argument about who was more suitable to be Nancy's boyfriend, which eventually escalated into a full-blown brawl, pulling each other's hair. The brawl ended when Charles pulled out a significant amount of Donald's precious thinning hair. After a glance at the soulless face of Donald, I loudly declared, "Well, I'm off to my new place. Thank you for everything. I'll be claiming compensation for the affair next time. Bye." I had said there would be no property division, but I didn't mean compensation. Sharon realized that this was a serious affair, and swinging the bag she was holding, began furiously beating Donald in a rage. Donald stood there, head hung low, as if he had been burned out completely, unable to process everything happening all at once. Watching this living hell unfold beside me, I couldn't stop smiling as I hopped on my beloved scooter and left the scene. Although it's a far stretch in my mind, I felt like Tom Cruise in Top Gun. Oh, it's been a while since I've ridden down such a refreshing night road. This is the best. Later on, when I proposed divorce, including the alimony, Charles said, "Please wait on the divorce. It seems that Sharon is also considering divorce, and there is a possibility that everyone might lose their homes or their circumstances might change. So he wants to save as much money as possible." He said things like, "Don't you think it's pitiful for us who once lived together to face such a difficult situation? And we need money now." But I didn't care, so I proceeded with the divorce talks without discussion and took as much money as I could get from Charles and his affair partner. When claiming the alimony, I felt a bit like an outlaw, but I hadn't done anything wrong. I had just done what was natural. Well, maybe tampering with someone's phone was slightly wrong. In the end, around the same time as our divorce, it seemed that Sharon also divorced Donald. Apparently, Donald and Nye's affair had been going on for over 5 years, and Sharon couldn't forgive that they had a relationship in private as well. I don't quite understand why bar hopping is forgivable, but private relationships aren't. I thought there are various forms of marriage. Well, in the end, we're not married anymore anyway. Donald was sued for alimony by Sharon, and Charles was sued for alimony by me. So the saying, "blood will out," held true, and the in-laws are now all scattered. Sharon, having been cheated on by Donald, seemed to have grown to despise men in general, including Charles, who had abandoned me in a similar manner. As a result, Charles and Sharon, after the divorce, are slowly becoming distant, though they do have minimal conversations. Donald, jobless, turned to Charles for help, but was rejected, as Charles himself was barely scraping by. Charles is juggling multiple jobs, while Sharon, who had been a housewife since her early marriage, is experiencing work for the first time with a part-time job. Donald became a part-time worker living in a cheap hotel. Charles, eager to marry Nancy, learned that she wasn't interested. Nancy saw both Charles and Donald as mere extensions of her bar work, as convenient sources of money. It turned out that Nancy had other men besides Charles in the same capacity. Charles, having been classmates with her, mistook her for being serious and believed she was his destiny. But in reality, it was a foolish and trivial story. In the end, both men were deemed unnecessary by Nancy, even as convenient sources of money, and were discarded. From my perspective, I thought, since I'm leaving, might as well destroy everything in the process, just as I aimed. I'm very satisfied, having witnessed the spectacular collapse of a family. No one in that family valued each other, only caring about themselves. So the outcome was, in a way, inevitable. Essentially, they were a family in name only, lacking any compassion. Now I think it was good that I got away from that household. On the other hand, while I still come home exhausted from work every day, living alone has freed up my time, as I no longer need to allocate it for someone else. I have more freedom than when I was married. Back when I was married, I hardly had time to meet my college friends. But now I can travel with them on my days off and even have time for my hobbies. In college, I was part of the choir, so I decided to join a karaoke club. It seems that one can continue to improve in music no matter the age. I consistently win at the club's competitions and even earn cash prizes. Thanks to that, my wallet is always warmly filled. At the facility where I work, my colleagues suggested hosting a karaoke recreation event since I'm good at it, and it was a huge hit. I received many compliments like, "You're so good," and was thrilled to bring smiles to the residents through my personal hobby, something I hadn't expected. By the way, my go-to performances are Unchained Melody and My Heart Will Go On. The lyrics of older songs are just so wonderful. I don't really understand recent songs, but I guess I should study up. Though my days aren't glamorous, I'm surrounded by friendly colleagues, trustworthy friends, and kind residents who feel like family beyond work boundaries. Finally, it seems like I've become the Joyland I was meant to be. From now on, I aim to be someone who not only receives joy but also shares.
The library's fluorescent lights flickered as I shuffled through another stack of books, my fingers tracing the embossed titles with a practiced ennui. This was my life, an endless cycle of shelving, sorting, and silence. A once vibrant passion had withered into a hollow routine, and I often found myself staring blankly at the dusty tomes, wondering where it all went wrong. That was until the letter arrived. Kira Weston? The mailroom clerk thrust the crinkled envelope into my hands, his brow furrowed with confusion. "This is addressed to you, but it looks, well, old." I studied the yellowed parchment, my heart skipping a beat at the unfamiliar handwriting. With trembling fingers, I tore it open, and a single sheet of paper fluttered to the floor. "What is it?" The clerk's voice was a distant echo as my eyes scanned the words that would forever alter the course of my life. I'm the sole heir to my great-aunt's estate." The clerk's eyes widened. "You've got family money?" I shook my head, my mind racing. I didn't even know I had a great-aunt. She lived in some coastal town called Ridgeview. "Well, what are you waiting for?" He clapped me on the shoulder, nearly knocking the wind out of me. "Go claim your fortune." Easier said than done. The next few days were a whirlwind of paperwork, legal proceedings, and the dawning realization that my life was about to change in ways I couldn't begin to fathom. Before I knew it, I was standing on the doorstep of a dilapidated Victorian manor, the salty sea breeze whipping my hair across my face. The once grand estate had fallen into disrepair, its peeling paint and overgrown gardens a testament to years of neglect. "You must be Miss Weston." I spun around to find a weathered man regarding me with a guarded expression. His calloused hands clutched a rusted set of keys. "Mason Richards," he said, offering a curt nod. "The caretaker." "It's nice to meet you," I replied, my voice faltering as I took in the crumbling facade before me. "This is a lot to take in." Mason's lips pressed into a thin line. "Aye, the old girl's seen better days, but she's got good bones." As we stepped inside, the musty air enveloped us like a shroud, and the floorboards groaned beneath our feet. Shadows danced across the peeling wallpaper, and a sense of foreboding settled deep within my gut. "Why did my great-aunt leave me this place?" I asked, unable to shake the feeling that I was missing a crucial piece of the puzzle. Mason's gaze was unreadable. "Couldn't rightly say, miss, but I reckon you'll find out soon enough." His cryptic words hung in the stale air, and I couldn't help but wonder what secrets lay buried within these crumbling walls. Little did I know, the path ahead would test my resolve in ways I never could have imagined. The next few weeks were a blur of renovation chaos. Contractors swarmed the estate, their hammers and saws echoing through the hollow hallways. I watched as the peeling wallpaper was stripped away, revealing layers of neglect and disrepair. But it wasn't just the manor that needed restoration. The entire town seemed to harbor a deep-seated resentment toward my family's legacy. "Best be careful, miss." Mason's gruff voice cut through the din of construction one afternoon. Folks round here ain't too keen on your kin. I frowned, wiping a bead of sweat from my brow. Why? What did my great-aunt do that was so terrible? Mason's steely gaze bore into me. Let's just say the Weston name ain't looked too kindly upon. Bad blood, you might call it. Before I could press further, the foreman barked orders, and Mason slipped away, leaving me with more questions than answers. As the days wore on, the hostility became increasingly palpable. Sideways glances and hushed whispers trailed me wherever I went. Even the simple task of grabbing groceries felt like running a gauntlet of scorn and suspicion. Didn't think we'd be seeing another Weston round these parts. The checkout clerk's sneer sent a chill down my spine as she shoved my bags across the counter. I mustered a tight smile, my fingers digging into the paper handles. I'm just trying to restore what's mine. Her laugh was a harsh bark. That's what they all say, ain't it? Just be careful you don't end up like the rest of 'em. The cryptic warning hung in the air long after I'd left the store, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was walking into a hornet's nest of buried secrets and bitter grudges. It wasn't until I stumbled upon a dusty journal tucked away in the attic that the pieces began to fall into place. The yellowed pages revealed a sordid tale of betrayal and revenge, detailing a long-standing feud between my great-aunt and the town's most prominent family, the Harlows. Apparently, their discord ran deeper than mere bad blood. There were accusations of theft, sabotage, and even violence. As I pored over the crinkled entries, a knot of dread twisted in my gut. What had my great-aunt done to incur such wrath? And what role did the Harlows play in this twisted saga? The answers, it seemed, lay buried beneath decades of lies and deception. But I was determined to unearth the truth, no matter how ugly it might be. Little did I know, the worst was yet to come. The journal entries painted a sordid picture, a twisted web of deceit and depravity that had entangled my family for generations. Nights were spent poring over the crinkled pages, my stomach churning with each new revelation. According to the faded scrawl, the Harlows were once our closest allies. United by wealth and status, the two families held an iron grip over Ridgeview's economy and social circles. But a scandalous affair between Jonathan Weston, my great-uncle, and Margaret Harlow shattered that bond forever. The betrayal ignited a feud that raged for decades, each family dealing brutal blows through underhanded business deals, character assassinations, and even outright sabotage. I always knew them Westons was bad news. Mason's gravelly voice made me jump as he emerged from the shadows of the attic. Can't be trusted, the lot of 'em. I slammed the journal shut, my heart racing. You knew about all this? He shrugged, a twisted smirk playing on his thin lips. Everyone in this town knows, Miss Weston. We just didn't figure you'd be dumb enough to come snooping around. White-hot anger flared in my chest as the truth sank in. Mason had been stringing me along this entire time, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. My hands trembled as I held up the damning evidence. So, what? The Harlows put you up to this? Keep me distracted while they plan their next move? His laugh was a hollow rasp that raised the hairs on my arms. Got a smart mouth on ya, don't ya? We'll see how long that lasts once the truth comes out. Before I could respond, he turned on his heel and disappeared, leaving me alone with the weight of my family's sordid legacy. The journal entries grew increasingly disturbing, detailing bitter rivalries, shattered lives, and dark deeds committed in the name of vengeance. It seemed no sin was too vile, no betrayal too unforgivable in the never-ending quest to destroy the other. But the final entry stopped me cold, a hastily scrawled confession of an unforgivable act, one that could very well be the key to unraveling this whole twisted saga. My great-aunt had orchestrated the framing and wrongful imprisonment of Simon Harlow, the family patriarch, over allegations of embezzlement and fraud. The evidence was damning, but according to her shaky scrawl, it had all been fabricated, a cruel lie spun from jealousy and malice. Simon Harlow had languished in prison for nearly a decade, his name and legacy dragged through the mud, all because of my family's treachery. The journal slipped from my trembling hands as the full weight of our sins crashed over me like a tidal wave. I knew then that I could no longer sit idly by and let this bitter feud consume what little remained of my family's honor. It was time to make amends, no matter the cost. After the sickening revelations found in those tattered journals, I knew I couldn't trust anyone in this godforsaken town, especially not that wretched snake, Mason. The walls were closing in, and I needed an ally, someone to help me unravel this twisted web before it suffocated me completely. That's when I met Eliza Caldwell. I first encountered the wizened local historian at Ridgeview's modest library, her delicate frame hunched over a battered tome. She regarded me with open curiosity as I browsed the stacks, her rheumy eyes studying me from behind thick spectacles. "You must be the new Weston," she said, her voice a lilting rasp. "I can't recall the last time I saw one of your kin round these parts." I bristled at her casual mention of my family's name, memories of Mason's cruel taunts still fresh. "I'm just here to settle my great-aunt's affairs." A wry smile tugged at Eliza's thin lips. "Is that so? Well, you've got your work cut out for you, that's for sure." Before I could respond, she gestured to the cramped study carrel beside her, its surface littered with faded photographs and crinkled documents. "Why don't you have a look at these? Might shed some light on your situation." What I discovered in those dusty archives nearly made my heart stop, a decades-old paper trail detailing a bitter land dispute between the Westons and Harlows. Deeds were forged, property was seized, and livelihoods were ruined, all in the name of petty rivalry. But it was the final document, a tattered arrest record, that truly turned my blood to ice. Simon Harlow, charged with racketeering and fraud on suspiciously flimsy evidence. 10 years in a federal penitentiary, a once-respected businessman left destitute and disgraced. My hands trembled as the horrible truth sank in. The cards had been stacked against him from the very beginning, a cruel vengeance plot orchestrated by none other than my own flesh and blood. "Your great-aunt was a real piece of work, wasn't she?" Eliza's voice cut through my stupor, her gaze knowing. "Nobody crosses a Weston without paying the price." I slumped back in my seat, sick realization churning in my gut. How could one family inflict so much pain and suffering? Eliza's bony hand rested atop mine, her touch surprisingly gentle. "That's the thing about grudges, my dear. They have a way of consuming us from the inside out until there's nothing left but bitterness and regret." In that moment, I knew what I had to do. For far too long, the Harlows had borne the brunt of my family's treachery and malice. It was time to right those wrongs, no matter the cost. "Help me," I pleaded, gripping Eliza's hand with newfound determination. "Help me put an end to this." Her steely gaze softened, a glimmer of respect flickering behind her spectacles. With a resolute nod, she sealed our fragile alliance. The reckoning was coming, whether Ridgeview was ready or not. With Eliza's help, the pieces were finally falling into place. We pored over those damning archives for hours on end, the bitter taste of betrayal souring my mouth with each new revelation. The more we uncovered, the deeper the Harlows' grievances against my family ran. Extortion, sabotage, character assassination. No low was too base when it came to ruining their hated rivals. And at the center of it all was Mason, that wretched snake who'd wormed his way into my confidences only to betray me at the first opportunity. "He's been in the Harlows' pockets this whole time," Eliza growled, slamming a faded dossier onto the table. "Feeding them information, stoking the feud to keep those old wounds fresh." My blood boiled at the thought of that traitorous weasel misleading me for his own nefarious agenda. "We have to stop him, expose what he and the Harlows have been up to once and for all." Eliza's steely gaze met mine, a grim determination hardening her wizened features. "Oh, we'll do more than that, my dear. By the time we're through, every last one of those bastards will get what's coming to them." As if on cue, a thunderous crash echoed through the manor, the walls trembling beneath the force of the impact. I raced to the foyer, my heart pounding, only to find the front door hanging askew on its hinges, the heavy oak splintered and cracked. Shards of broken glass crunched beneath my feet as I ventured further inside, dread coiling in my gut. Another resounding crash made me jump, followed by the deafening shriek of rending metal. I rounded the corner to find the once immaculate parlor in shambles, furniture overturned and priceless heirlooms strewn about like discarded trash. And there, amidst the wreckage, stood Mason, flanked by 2 burly thugs in workmen's coveralls. A sadistic grin split his weathered face as he brandished a crowbar, its dull metal glinting in the dim light. Renovations are going a mite slower than expected, he sneered. Thought we'd pick up the pace a bit. White-hot rage surged through me as I took in the wanton destruction, the pieces finally clicking into place. You did this? On the Harlow's orders? Give the girl a prize, Mason cackled, twirling the crowbar idly. Can't have you sticking that pretty little nose where it don't belong. We had an agreement, see? You keep your head down and we let you keep on breathing. Eliza hurried to my side, her face pale with fury. You'll pay for this, you miserable wretch, all of you. Mason's laughter was a harsh bark that raised the hairs on my arms. Is that so? I'd like to see you try, you withered old. Enough! The words tore from my throat in a savage growl. Trembling with rage, I snatched up a heavy bronze candlestick from the floor, leveling it at the traitorous cur like a weapon. Get out, I seethed through gritted teeth. Get out now while you still can. For a long moment, Mason simply stared at me, that twisted smirk slowly fading from his face. Then, almost imperceptibly, he nodded, signaling for his goons to withdraw. Have it your way, Miss Weston, he spat, venom dripping from his words. But this ain't over. Not by a long shot. As they skulked away, the weight of his menacing promise hung in the air like a cancer. I knew then, without a shadow of a doubt, that there would be no turning back. No more games. No more deceptions. Only the reckoning that had been so long in coming. The wreckage in the parlor was like a war zone, a harsh reminder of just how far the Harlows were willing to go to protect their rotten lies. My hands trembled with rage as I surveyed the devastation, centuries of history reduced to scattered ash and splintered wood. Eliza's wizened face was pale, her eyes flashing with determination. We can't let them get away with this. I nodded, my jaw set. They won't. It's time we brought this whole sordid affair into the light once and for all. Thanks to our tireless research, we had more than enough evidence to expose the Harlows and their bootlicking worm, Mason. Doctored deeds, forged contracts, eyewitness accounts of bribery and extortion. It was all there, a damning paper trail that would finally bring their reign of terror crashing down. As night fell, I gathered the most incriminating documents into a leather satchel, heart pounding in my chest. Send word to the mayor. Tell him there's to be an emergency town hall meeting first thing tomorrow morning. Eliza arched a grizzled brow. You aim to air our dirty laundry for the whole town to see? My, you are a bold one. My grip tightened on the satchel strap. They've been lying and cheating their way through life for far too long. It's past time someone finally yanked back the curtain and showed them for what they really are. A ghost of a smile tugged at Eliza's lips. And here I thought you were just another entitled Weston looking to reap what your ancestors had sown. Clearly I underestimated you. With a curt nod, she turned on her heel and strode away, no doubt to set our daring plan into motion. My body thrummed with nervous energy as I waited for daybreak, pacing restlessly through the ravaged manor. Would the town believe my accusations? Or would the Harlows' deep-seated influence prevail once more? So many years of deception and treachery had festered like an open wound. Was I about to pour salt straight into it? The first rays of sunlight were just cresting the horizon when a sharp rap echoed through the foyer. I pulled open the door to find Mason leering at me from the cracked stoop, a self-satisfied sneer twisting his leathery features. You just had to go poking your nose where it didn't belong, didn't you, Missy? He shook his head in mock regret. And here I tried to go easy on you. From behind his back, he produced a crinkled document purportedly bearing my great-aunt's signature, passing it over to me. See for yourself. By the lawful terms laid out here, you're to vacate the premises immediately and surrender all claim to this land and property. Failure to comply means the authorities will be getting involved. My hands shook as I scanned the document, that same white-hot rage boiling in my veins. It was a blatant forgery, an amateurish attempt to strong-arm me out of my rightful inheritance. This is a lie, I spat, crumpling the document and flinging it back in Mason's face. An obvious deception, just like everything else you pathetic cowards have put forth. The venom in my words seemed to catch the wretched man off guard. For a brief moment, genuine fear flickered in those beady eyes before the mask of smug arrogance slipped back into place. Have it your way, then. He turned and made his way back to the battered truck, idling on the cracked drive. Just remember, You were warned." His parting words hung bitter in the salty air as I watched him pull away, that righteous anger slowly hardening into grim determination. The Harlows and their ilk had held this town in an iron grip for far too long, using lies and intimidation to consolidate their twisted power. But not anymore. The reckoning was finally at hand. The rickety town hall was packed to the rafters, a low murmur of confusion and unease buzzing through the crowd as Ridgeview's residents filtered in. I could feel their eyes boring into me, a heady mix of suspicion and morbid curiosity. Eliza shot me a sidelong glance, her wrinkled brow arched. "Second thoughts?" I clutched the worn leather satchel tight to my side, my jaw set. Not a chance. It's long past time these people learn the truth. As the last few stragglers found their seats, Mayor Tillman rapped his gavel against the podium, calling the meeting to order. Basking in the heavy silence, I rose to my feet, heart thundering in my ears. "People of Ridgeview, I come before you today with evidence of a great deception, a web of lies and treachery spun by two families locked in an endless cycle of hatred and vengeance." A hushed ripple of muttering washed over the crowd, their eyes narrowing with suspicion. From the back row, a familiar, grizzled face sneered at me. Mason and his Harlow masters, no doubt expecting me to slink away in disgrace. Not this time. For generations, the Westons and Harlows have engaged in bitter feuds fueled by greed, jealousy, and malice. I produced a sheaf of documents from the satchel, letting them flutter to the floor in a ragged cascade. Property was stolen, lives were ruined, all in the name of settling petty scores, laying the foundations for the con that has gripped this town in fear for far too long. A heavy-set man in a grease-stained shirt shot to his feet, face ruddy with outrage. "That's a damn lie, Weston. Your family's been pulling heists and scams ever since you lot crawled out of the mud." Chaos erupted, angry shouts and profanities hurled like daggers. The mayor pounded his gavel, imploring for order, but the mob had already reached a fever pitch. Reckoning be damned, it seemed. I had gravely underestimated the depth of the town's hatred for my family's legacy. Just as I began to doubt the futility of my mission, a familiar, reedy voice cut through the din. "That's quite enough out of you lot." Eliza shouldered her way to the front of the hall, a defiant light blazing in those rheumy eyes. Leaning heavily on her cane, she produced a stack of weathered documents, slamming them onto the podium with startling force. "Miss Weston speaks the truth. Everything from forged deeds and extortion schemes to outright perjury and character assassination, all of it meticulously orchestrated by the Harlows to line their own pockets at the expense of their rivals." The hall fell into a stunned hush, every eye riveted on the frail old woman standing tall before them. With trembling hands, Eliza held up a sepia-toned photograph, the image of a grim-faced man in a tattered prison uniform searing itself into my memory. "Simon Harlow," she proclaimed, her voice thick with contempt. "Wrongfully imprisoned for a decade on falsified charges of racketeering, all thanks to the vile machinations of Kira's great-aunt. A good man's life ruined in the name of petty grudges and shameful greed." A chorus of gasps and muttered denials washed over the crowd, the raw truth of Eliza's damning revelations chipping away at the foundations of their reality. Through it all, the Harlows remained conspicuously silent, their arrogant sneers slowly melting away. At last, the evidence was laid bare before Ridgeview. The generations of corruption, duplicity, and outright criminality they had wallowed in, for the sake of lining their pockets, exposed in its ugly, unvarnished glory. I turned to face the shriveled husk that was Mason, fresh glee bubbling up in my chest. "Well, any other lies or forgeries you'd care to share with the group?" His face had gone an ashy gray, all swagger and bravado drained away in the wake of our courtroom coup. Slumping in his chair, he simply shook his head, lips pressed into a grim line. At long last, I realized the man had nothing left to say. The reckoning had finally arrived. The weeks following that explosive town hall were a whirlwind of legal proceedings, public hearings, and long overdue reckonings. One by one, the Harlows' duplicitous deeds were laid bare before the courts, their criminal empire of lies and subterfuge crumbling to dust. Matriarch Constance Harlow was first to face justice, led away in handcuffs on charges of tax evasion, money laundering, and racketeering. Her smug veneer had finally cracked, revealing the small, pathetic woman cowering beneath all those ill-gotten riches. The remaining Harlow progeny soon followed, convicted of everything from bribery to outright sabotage. Even their most zealous allies were implicated in the ever-widening scandal, with Weasley Mason getting his long-overdue comeuppance on conspiracy and perjury charges. Through it all, I remained steadfast, testifying tirelessly to ensure every last truth was dragged into the harsh light of day. It was a soul-scouring process, reliving those wretched feuds and betrayals over and over again, but a necessary purging if Ridgeview had any hope of healing. With each damning verdict, I could feel the town's wounds beginning to knit, the sour taint of corruption steadily lifting like a noxious fog. Of course, the most deep-seated scars would likely never fully heal, but for the first time in living memory, there was a chance for something better. The night the final Harlow crony was carted off in chains, I gathered with Eliza on the renovated Manor's terrace, clinking glasses of crisp white wine as the last rays of twilight caressed the salty air. Well, that's that, I suppose. The wry historian's eyes twinkled over the rim of her glass. No more dark family secrets to drag into the open, no bitter vendettas to unravel. Whatever shall we do with all our free time? I couldn't help but laugh, savoring the simple joy of the moment, a simple pleasure that had been denied me for far too long. I don't know about you, but I could use a break from uncovering any more generational sins or bringing down corrupt dynasties. Eliza arched an owlish brow. Is that your way of saying you'll be leaving us, Miss Weston? Can't say I'm surprised. Lord knows, this town gave you every reason to hightail it out of here once the dust settled. Pausing to take another sip, I let my gaze drift out over the immaculate grounds, emotion swelling in my chest. This ramshackle relic that had once represented everything broken about my family legacy was now a point of pride, a symbol of our tenacity and perseverance in the face of those who sought to tear us down. Actually, I was thinking of staying put for a while. I favored the dear old woman with a warm smile. Someone has to keep this place standing after all we've been through to restore it. And besides, I spread my arms, gesturing to the bustling streets beyond the Manor's ivy-wreathed gates. I think Ridgeview and I might just have a second chance here. Eliza regarded me for a long moment, those rheumy eyes alight with something akin to wonder. Then, inclining her glass in a silent toast, she let a sly grin crease her weathered features. Well, I'll be damned. Looks like the Westons just might have produced a good egg after all. The twilit breeze carried her dry chuckle through the crisp evening air, banishing the last vestiges of darkness from this hard-won new beginning. For too long, the bitter feud between the Westons and Harlows had poisoned this town, mirroring it in a quagmire of hatred and pain. But those days were finally behind us. A new dawn was breaking over Ridgeview, and as I took my first unfettered breath of that fresh, salty air, I knew I was finally home.